Advisory Council Legislative Subcommittee. Are you in fact recording? I don't see the sign. Oh, yes. Are you recording, Todd? Okay, great. Thanks. My name's Emily Harris, and I chair the subcommittee, and we have with us today, I think you counted a quorum. Let's see, Todd, you're here. Who else is here from the committee? Mark, I see you. Hello. Who else is here from the committee?
Michael.
Michael, I'm here.
Great. Hi, Michael and
Hi, guys.
Steve. Okay, so we made the magic number. Great. And we have a great group of people here today to talk to us about the cost of public records requests. Patty Perlow, the Lane County District Attorney, is running a little bit late to video access, so she will loop her in when she gets here. Tammy Weiss, the Digital and Public Records Manager from the Portland Police Bureau, and supported by Jennifer Johnson. Leila Yelasetti, am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Leila? Leila, I don't know if you're here yet, but we will make sure to get your name correctly pronounced when you are here. She's with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and Vance Crony, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Vance, from Benton County. The Benton County Council will also be with us today, and we'll have time at the end for some comments from the public. Just to remind everybody who, if anybody's new here, this is part of our ongoing series. We've been talking since December, every 3 weeks, with a different panel of people, stakeholders, and people who are interested in the public records process about the cost of public records and ideas to manage that cost best for the public interest and transparency. And this is part of that ongoing process. So this is being recorded. We'll go ahead and start. Let's see, if Patty's not here, why don't we start with Tammy Weiss from the Portland Police Bureau. You're here, right, Tammy?
Yes, I am here.
Fantastic. If you would like to just go ahead, people have been, thanks a lot for joining us, really appreciate it. And people have just been presenting for 5 or 10 minutes, and then folks from the council typically do have some questions. So if you don't mind that, we'll make that part of the process as well. But the floor is yours. If you have something to share and you have any logistical troubles, we talked about that a little bit before we got recording, we'll manage it when you get going.
So actually, I worked with Jennifer Johnston on a presentation, and I'm seeing if Jennifer, she has a puzzled look on her face, if she can get it to come up.
I need to restart. I need to restart, and I'm wondering if we could, would it be possible to trade with DEQ? Leila, would that mess you up if you went first?
Great.
I would really appreciate it because I can't figure out what's going on. It was working right until I logged on.
It always happens that way. I'm completely sympathetic. Okay, thank you for your flexibility, Leila. And am I pronouncing your last name, Yelasetti?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So please, the floor is yours.
Also pulling up some slides. Folks can see that. Great. Thank you so much, members of the PRAC, for inviting me to speak here today about public records requests and fees at DEQ. To start, my name is Leila Yelasetti. I'm the Information Governance Officer, and just wanted to give a little bit of background on our agency. So DEQ's mission is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. We are a state agency, and we're budget and fee funded. I wanted to point that out because we actually get very little funding from general funds. So a lot of our programs are self-funded through fees and so forth. We have about 700 employees across the state in 9 different offices, other locations, and manage hundreds of different programs, from vehicle testing, which is probably most familiar to folks in the Portland area at least, but a lot of regulatory functions, environmental monitoring, cleanup, spill response, and materials management. So we do a lot for such a small agency. We're definitely not anywhere close to City of Portland, but we do get one of the highest numbers of public records requests of any state agency at around 300 per month. And many of these are related to a specific facility or site that is of interest to property owners or developers, but then other requests can be broader in scope and reflect public and media interest in agency decisions that, of course, impact our shared environment. We currently have a full-time records staff of 2, myself and Kristen Mercer, our public records coordinator. So in order to manage our volume of requests, we rely on a network of about 50 different public records coordinators in our various programs and regional offices. And in June of 2020, we implemented a request tracking software called GovQA to help manage our requests. So I'm proud to say that with this new tool and improved processes, we've averaged a 99% compliance rate for the last several quarters. So that's either, and you can see here the dark green bars are completed in less than 15 business days. The light green are we completed, it took longer than 15, but we complied with the requirements around communicating with the requesters. So very great compliance rate there. And as you can see from this graph, the new system has made it much easier for both our internal users and for requesters who now have the option to download their records from the online portal and also to pay fees online directly with a credit card. In the past, we could only take cash or check based on our limitations. And it's also allowed us to collect a lot more metrics around our requests. Yeah, Mark.
I'm sorry, I tried to promise myself that I'd speak as little as possible today, but I just can't help myself, as my colleagues know on the committee or the commission. So I'm curious, this is really great information, and I really wish that the rest of the state agencies were doing something like this, because this is fantastic in tracking, you know, not only the volume, but whether or not you're compliant with the state deadlines. However, I'm curious about, it seems as though you have a pretty decent volume. I'm sure it's not anything compared to the Portland Police Bureau, but it's a pretty significant volume. Do you have this broken down by sources or types of requesters, Tammy? Or excuse me, I'm sorry. Forgive me, I'm sorry. I can't see your full name, Leela, but I apologize. But do you have the sources of those types of requests documented as well? I'll shut up at this point.
Yep, and that slide is coming, so we'll be getting into that for sure. But I'll say, yeah, vast majority are site specific, so it's people looking at a particular property for whatever reason. So those are the ones that tend to be more straightforward, and the ones that get more complex are the ones we'll get into with the fees. So I kind of nerd out on getting all these different numbers and metrics. I will give just a grain of salt that we're still figuring out the best way to kind of track the amount of time and fees we collect without adding more burden to our employees in terms of the time involved in doing so. So some of these are approximate. Our data is not 100% clean, but it'll give you at least a ballpark. So I did want to give a background just on our fee schedule. So in 2017, the Department of Administrative Services came out with a standardized fee schedule for all state agencies. We actually had our fees already written into rule, and so we're waiting on DAS to incorporate those into their rules so we can just adopt those by reference. In the meantime, we're basically splitting the difference and charging whatever is the lower of the two rates of DEQ's or DAF's fee schedule. So that's what you see on the column on the left is our hourly rates. And I did try to do some basic approximations of what the actual rates are for DEQ employees in these different categories, just to give a sense that for the most part, we're charging less than actual costs for our staff time. And that's especially true when it gets to managers and attorney time that we have to pay out to DOJ as our legal counsel. We don't really do much copying anymore, but we do use a vendor for outside scanning for large scanning jobs, and we just charge whatever the amount is charged by the vendor, which their going rate is cents a page. Per the schedule, we waive the first 30 minutes of a request. In practice, it's usually even up to 40 minutes or more, because the time involved in collecting the fees ends up not being worth our time. So my estimate is that we're looking at least 140 hours per month of staff time that we're using for records requests free of charge. Any costs entailed with the requests are billed back to the programs that the records are coming from, but we use the fees to actually offset the cost of the GovQA software. Doesn't come anywhere close to the amount that we're paying, but it helps with that, covering that cost. So here's the breakdown, and most of these metrics are just, I'm taking the entire period since we got the software in 2020, so we can get the most accurate averages. So in that whole period, we've had about 5,700 requests, and we've only charged fees on around 3% of those. So we've collected 41,000 overall in fees, which averages out to about 2,000 per month. And as you can see, the vast majority, the vast majority of our requests are closed within 15 days. The average time open is around 12 days, and the average time open for requests with fees is significantly higher. And that's because these tend to be just the ones that are much more complex. Yeah, Todd.
Hey, Leila, thanks. So, we've heard it been said, and I don't disagree, by more than one public body, that the ability to impose fees helps bring requesters to the table to narrow, limit, or otherwise sort of make their requests more concise. Clearly, you're not charging fees in most circumstances here that you've been tracking. Only 3% of requests end up with fees. So I wonder, what is your opinion about the ability to use a fee estimate as a way to negotiate a smaller request? And do you think any of your numbers here reflect the fact that you've done that and managed to reduce requests that you no longer had to charge because they were made smaller?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it has been a useful, and to be honest, like before we even issue the estimate, if we see that something is maybe going to be way more costly than it needs to be, we'll proactively reach out to the requester first, see if they're willing to narrow the request. Maybe we can provide certain records and see if that's what they're looking for, and then we can go from there. So in general, and I'd say especially, well, in most categories of requesters, it can be an effective tool to have the fees to sort of say, well, this is what you're looking at if you really want all of this. Otherwise, let's see if we can work together to reduce those fees. There's one category of requesters where that has not been significantly effective, and that would be from law firms, because these are lawyers who are just billing the cost back to their clients, and a lot of times they really do want everything because they're trying to make a case. So that's where we really get into those larger fees. And this is actually brings me perfectly to the next slide. So this is the breakdown. Oh yeah, Steve.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So going back a couple of slides, you referenced 140 hours a month, basically cost not recouped. And you said there are 2 FTEs, including yourself, on dedicated to public records. So that would be, I believe, 320 hours a month of your time is dedicated. 140 of it is spent like uncompensated, and then I guess, I mean, you obviously you're doing other things beyond answering records requests, I guess.
Right. So I'm actually talking more there for our coordinators in the various programs and offices, because the central records staff, we're more like air traffic controllers for the most part. So we dole out requests based on the various departments. The exception is Kristen will directly manage requests that are statewide, that involve multiple different programs, involve email searches, or otherwise very complicated. So mostly we're talking actually about staff, usually support staff within the various departments who are doing that processing.
I see. So that's 140 hours on top of your time and your fellow person's time.
Right. And yeah, my job
sorry,
is, yeah, our jobs are much broader than just records requests because we manage the records and information governance programs for the agency as well.
I see. Okay. And thank you. And also you mentioned the 41,000 in fees recouped. Would you say most or all of that is from law firms?
So this slide I have up here. It kind of gives you a breakdown. So the first one is the breakdown of requests of the number of requests we receive. So you can see the vast majority are consultants. And so those are ones that are usually property specific, and only 3% are from law firms. Only 1% of our requests are actually from the media. But when you look at the portion of fees that we're charging, it's by and large law firms. I was actually a little surprised that nonprofits showed up as a significant section here. I looked at the numbers, it's actually only for 4 requests, and for whatever reason, those groups opted not to request a fee waiver. But yeah, that's sort of the breakdown in terms of the fees. Yeah.
Sorry, one last one, I promise. I see on the right-hand side, it looks like there's no media. Media's 1% of requests, and is it 0% of fees? Do you just routinely across the board waive fees on news media?
Yes, I believe we have not charged, at least not in the time since we've started tracking, have we charged any fees to media. I think in the past we may have on request had to do a partial waiver if the request was overly broad, but in general, we waive all fees for media. Yeah, I can move to the next slide, I think. So basically, our biggest pain point when it comes to requests are the ones that ask for emails. The agency currently has an archive of more than 30 million emails and counting, and our search tools are not particularly sophisticated when it comes to unstructured content like emails. We've had to process requests involving tens of thousands of emails, some of which have to be reviewed by multiple people in consultation with our attorneys to determine which exemptions might apply, and it's really not an easy thing to do. So that's where a lot of our fees show up. So you can see here, we've been tracking how many requests asked for emails. It's only 1% of our total requests, but 11% of our requests for fees and 57% of the total fees we've charged are specifically requests involving email. So in the same time period, from July 2020 till present, we received a total of 298 requests for fee waivers. There's an option on the form when they submit their records request to mark that they're interested in receiving a waiver, and we'll ask them to fill out some questions. In a large portion of these, even though they requested a waiver, we didn't actually have any fees assessed on that request. So that's like 72%. We just didn't even have to process their waiver request because it was free. And then the remaining, almost all of them, we were granted a full waiver. There was 3 requests in that period that we denied a waiver for, and there was 1 partial waiver we approved, but the requester ended up withdrawing. So overall, we've waived $18,440 in fees, and that averages out to about $922 per month. So I won't read through all of these, but we do base our waiver process on DAS guidance as well. So these are the questions that we ask to the requester when they're applying for a waiver, And it's really giving them a chance to describe why their request is in the public interest, what means they have to disseminate the information to the public, and what the overall value and benefit is to the public. And on our end, we answer the following questions when we're reviewing that waiver request. And we only do this if there are actually fees associated. But basically, from our side, we're looking at the question of public interest and then balancing that against, what's the burden to the agency. So this is the place at which, if we do see that there's a clear public interest, but the scope of the request is overly broad, we might try to work with the requester to see if they can narrow it down so we can actually waive all their fees. Yeah, Emily. You're muted.
You're right. Thank you. Thanks for this. This is a really helpful presentation. I'm curious how useful you find the 8 questions that you have here in your waiver review process. Do you feel like it successfully gets you to the right answer most of the time? Do you just interested in whether you think this is how useful of a tool is this specific set of questions for you in determining the public interest?
Yeah, so it's certainly not an airtight formula. There's no sort of set prescription in the DAS instructions. It's sort of, we're instructed to look at the totality of the circumstances. So it could go one way or another depending on the answers to these different questions. And certainly it's a bit of a judgment call. So we haven't gotten like clear guidance on that front. Usually it's pretty straightforward. If it's a media requester, we can tell very clearly that they have that there's a public interest, that they have a means to disseminate the information, that there's not a clear private interest. I will say the 3 requests where we did deny a waiver were all from private companies or individuals who had a clear private interest and or legal interest, and the public interest was a bit of a stretch in the way they presented it. So those were the only occasions when we denied a waiver.
Okay, and who are the people who are involved in this process of reviewing the waiver?
Yeah, so the records team, usually Kristen or myself, does the initial evaluation. We answer these questions. We make a recommendation based on our impression, and then it goes to our manager, who is the manager of our policy and operations team, has the final say, but she usually checks in with the manager of the relevant programs to understand whether this would be a unreasonable burden for them. And it is ultimately coming out of those program budgets. So we do consult with them. So it's a number of checks in there, but there hasn't been a lot of disagreements for the most part. I think there was one where it was kind of a broad request, and that may have been the partial waiver where the program just said, well, this is going to take a large amount of resources to complete, so we're trying to figure out if we could work with the requester to bring it down a bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So I think I've answered these. Oh, I also have a breakdown of waivers by requester type. So here you can see again the majority of the waivers we've granted. We certainly granted more waivers to the media than they represent in our overall requester base, but we do get quite a few requests from nonprofit environmental advocacy groups. So that's the big section. I don't really know what we waived at a law firm, but I'm guessing that they were working on behalf of an advocacy group or something like that. And Emily, did you have another question?
No, go ahead.
So I just wanted to finish with a couple observations, at least from an agency standpoint. We are in the midst of a massive modernization project at DEQ. We've already rolled out wave one of a new online permitting system called Your DEQ Online, and we'll be moving a large portion of our programs into that platform, which means that we'll be replacing a lot of processes that previously were in paper, a lot of sending copies of applications in triplicate and manual processes to moving entirely online for those. So obviously that's a huge benefit for the regulated community and users of our services, but also for the public, because now we have the opportunity to make a lot of those records immediately available to the public through the portal. We're still working through some of the details about what we can and can't post there, but the fact that all of this is born digital makes it much easier to make that information available. We also have undertaken a number of projects to digitize legacy paper records. We have manage a lot of paper still as an agency. We have records going back to our founding in the 60s. And a lot of environmental records because of the nature of how long hazards live in the environment, the long-term nature of environmental trends. There's a lot of legacy paper records that are actually of high public value. And we found that we can significantly reduce records requests for some of those most requested records. So a few years ago, our residential on-site septic program, which DEQ manages septic records for just a handful of counties. But we digitized and put all of those online, and that on its own reduced our number of requests by 100 per month, which is pretty significant. So that's huge. We have we have a couple other programs that have done the same, and we have others who are interested, but it is expensive. So that's where, we don't have any designated funds for this. The programs often are really tied to being able to map all of their budget back to specific projects. So that forms a barrier. Mark, did you have a question? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I just was trying to find the darn mute button. I apologize. I want to confirm to the rest of my colleagues here that it is really expensive to do this. I do follow the DEQ budget fairly closely as a result of my other job. And, the department has really tried to digitize over the last, 4 to 6 years. Last session, or actually the long session before, was sort of a seminal time for the department when they really did begin charging the various permittees, either through the land, water, or air quality divisions to set up a much more robust system. And the payers, are the public. And it is not, as Leela points out, inexpensive. It is very expensive stuff to do. I do want to compliment the department, though, because it does make a lot of their work go more smoothly. And I expect we'll see a lot of great results from it. But I think another point here, Leela, is that you've brought to us some really great data that I don't think we've seen yet from other various state agencies. I just want to compliment the department for what you're doing in this area, just very briefly, because this is really the first time I've seen this kind of data coming from a state agency. And this is really helpful stuff. So thank you very much for being with us today and sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, actually, just a request, at your convenience, please send me your slides so I could post them with the hearing, with the video for this meeting. And I just wanted to let our chair know that DA Perlow has joined us.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome. Welcome, DA Perlow. Leila, I wasn't sure if you were finished with, if this was your last slide or if you have more to share.
Yeah, this is my last slide. I just to add one more note in explaining the picture here. I think one thing that we are still facing, even as we try to make things more available proactively, is we're never going to be able to put everything online because of the privacy issues and exemptions. And we're just seeing such an explosion of digital content as we see, emails, now, Teams messages, text messages, just so electronic storage can be a double-edged sword because storage is cheap, but the costs of managing that are not insignificant. So I like this picture because this bank of boxes is actually estimated to be about a gigabyte of data. So you think about when we're dealing with probably hundreds of terabytes of data at the agency, the time involved in being able to go through and review that, it's like looking through this many boxes. So it's still a challenge, and I really appreciate your time today and appreciate this committee's willingness to look into this question.
We so appreciate your willingness to share your experience. It's invaluable. Steve has his hand up. I have a couple quick questions, and I am also conscious we have 3 other people who've come to share their knowledge, and so we'll probably move on shortly. But Steve, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I'll make it quick. I also want to say I think the DEQ is doing a really great job in keeping the data, and you've provided a real service in sharing it with us. And I think the way that you're handling records requests is a good model for other agencies. With the movement of records or the digitization process, I imagine you had to decide that there's a whole pile of records that we're just not even going to review. I mean, you can't be reviewing every single record for redactable information. How did you make that determination and feel comfortable with it?
So we've chose it, for the most part, we've selected records that we think are going to be of high public value. And so we're not digitizing all the emails or things that might be harder to review. But we have had some challenges. We just finished a project of all of our underground storage tank records were digitized, but a portion of those we found actually contained canceled checks that people had put in the files back in the day to show, that people had paid their fees. And those are actually really difficult. We haven't found a good tool that can actually allow us to automate detection of those old check numbers to redact them. So we've had to actually keep those internal. But a lot of those records that we get frequent requests for, either we've already segregated the confidential information in the file, or they didn't really contain too much sensitive information.
Thank you.
Thank you. And does anybody else, Todd or Michael or Mark, have another question for Leila? I have one more, but anybody else want to jump in? No, okay. Leila, I just wanted to ask you about the two quick questions that maybe they're not too quick, but see if you can take a stab at either of them. One, the point that DEQ is dedicating considerable resources to public records requests without dedicated funding. It sounds like separately than this big project to digitize. So my one question is, like, what difference would it make to you if there was dedicated funding in some way, shape, or form? How might that affect your operations or your budget or the decisions you make? And I know that's a hypothetical, just kind of trying to get a feel for potential solutions. And the other thing I want to ask is, this email thing, other people have raised it as really tough to go through and figure out what you can release and not. Are you aware of any tools on the horizon that are being developed, or like the one thing you'd love to be able to do faster, just very purely from a technical standpoint to make that easier? Would you mind taking a stab at both of those hypothetical questions?
Absolutely. So in terms of the budget, yes, absolutely. Scanning projects in general, I think, is a huge thing, and recognizing too that it's not just the cost of scanning, which on its own is a lot, but it's also the organization and, you know, the metadata, making sure that the records that we're putting online are easily searchable, accessible, findable by the public and people who need to use them. It can be a big project, especially when we have we have these big cleanup sites, which one site file could be 100 boxes. We can't just scan them all and put them in one bucket, or nobody's going to be able to find what they're looking for. So there's a lot of, I think, both scanning and personnel time that we could use for things like that. But then also, I think just funding to have more time to get, you know, ability to get legal review when needed, to have staff time dedicated to being able to go through. It would certainly speed up some of the bigger requests because sometimes the review time is depending on subject matter experts or managers whose time is already strapped. So being able to have that ability is going to be really helpful. In terms of email, I have a number of opinions, but I think so the state has recently moved to Microsoft 365. We still have an old email archive, so now we're searching two. We're planning to migrate the old archive into the 365 archive, so we only have to search one place. But really, I think there's a couple different approaches, and there are tools inherent to Microsoft that we haven't yet activated, and it's going to be a conversation with DAS because it's a statewide client. But one is implementing retention policies on email. Not all the emails we have need to be retained forever, and then they just end up adding to clutter that, you know, makes it harder to find the actual content that people are looking for in the emails. So trying to come up with email management retention policies that actually help with that volume. And then the second is application of security tagging, because right now there's no way to really flag anything so we may like review an email for one request, determine it's exempt. And then if we get another request and that same email comes up, we have to review it all over again. So there's security tagging features in 365 that I think if we only had to touch it once and could flag it at the outset, then it would make life a lot easier going forward with requests.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate your time today, and I trust you wouldn't mind if we have further questions if we reach out to you.
Michael has his hand up as well.
Oh, Michael, sorry, didn't see you. Go ahead, Michael.
So this is a question that I think I'll probably be asking more than once today. I'm just trying to understand a little bit when you say that you don't have dedicated PRR funding. I'm wondering, like, does that include things like public information officers, communications staff generally? Does it include, I mean, did you go to the legislature and get an appropriation for like this DEQ online? I guess I'm just kind of wondering, like, when you say no dedicated funding for PRRs, is that a function of like not actually having money for it, or is it a function of kind of where the agency is sort of locating the public records obligations sort of within the administration of the agency, or what do you mean by that, really?
Yeah, I guess there's nothing specifically that's been allocated by the legislature for agencies to handle public records requests. I mean, obviously, from an agency budget perspective, funds have been allocated, at least for the central records staff. So basically all of our central services operations at DEQ, because we're such a fee-funded agency, we fund the central operations by what's called an indirect rate. So it'll be a portion of all of the rest of the budget items that are then designated to manage our central IT, HR, finance, records, communications, and so forth. So we do fund through that.
And then I assume what you need from the legislature then is just position authority for those positions, if they're being funded by other than general funds. This is very bureaucratic, but I'm just trying to understand.
And I'm not an expert on how our budget works, but I do know that when it comes to something like a digitization project. Our central services budget has not been large enough to fund that directly, so it usually ends up going back to the individual programs, and that's where, you know, there's just not a lot of resources. There's not a lot of wiggle room in some of those budgets.
Okay, thanks.
So-
And
so-
also,
Yeah,
before I,
Yeah, so, sorry, Michael, just really quickly. So for example, one of the things that DEQ did was created a surcharge on their permits and on their credit card charges to help pay for this system that they're implementing at the department. I just wanted to throw that in there to help maybe give you a little bit of context. I don't know if that helps.
that does. And really the last thing I wanted to say was just to echo what others have said already, which is it looks to me like you guys are handling your public record system in a way that's frankly exemplary. It didn't look like you were denying many, if any, fee waiver requests and yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
There's my unmute button. Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, Leila. Really appreciate it. Let's see. We do have a public comment period at the end. So if anybody's got questions, that time will come up. We want to move on now to, let's see, Patty Perlow is here from the Lane County District Attorney's Office. Yes, hello. I see you. Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. And hello, Todd. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I found Leila's presentation fascinating. So I am grateful to have had that opportunity. I don't have a PowerPoint. What my intention was to spend just a few minutes talking about how public records impact my office and leave the rest of the time for questions. So public records impact my office in two ways. The first is direct requests for police reports, our files, any reports that we've done, letters, communication correspondence, just direct requests from the district attorney's office. And then the other is the appeal process. If a public body within Lane County, which includes the University of Oregon, denies a public record request or redacts things to a point that the requester thinks is unreasonable, or if there's a fee waiver request or a fee reduction request that's denied, those appeals come to my office and we review them. And it's probably easier just to start with the appeal process. I will tell you from the outset that having my office make a determination of whether somebody's fee is reasonable or should be waived, I am completely uncomfortable with that. We make an inquiry of the agency. How did you determine your fee? And then have to make a decision of whether or not that is a reasonable fee or there should be a waiver. And typically we will defer to the agency knowing what their costs are, and they're under the statute that they can recover their actual costs. Denials of records or redactions can be a huge time-consuming burden on my office for which we receive no compensation. I have to pull a lawyer from their prosecutorial function to review these cases and make a determination. And some of them are really pretty simple, don't take very long at all. Some of them are huge, involving, well, particularly the University of Oregon, or we had one involving EWEB, Eugene Water and Electric Board, and Seneca Sawmill that had a contract. So it was public-private. And so I know that's probably beyond what this body is looking into, but it's something that really is outside the sphere of knowledge of the district attorney's office to have a person dedicated to that without any compensation. Going to how my office in particular deals with public records requests, what happens here is if somebody makes a request, it comes directly to me. I review it. If it's something that can be done without taking a staff person from their other obligations, I just do it for free. if somebody's requesting a copy of what they call the Brady list, I just run it and provide it. If somebody's asking for something from emails from my inbox that doesn't require going to what we call technology services or IT to get it, or if one of my lawyers, if they're looking for correspondence, we just provide it. It is only if it is going to be somebody taking a old case file that isn't electronic. If we could provide it really easily, it's already in electronic form, we'll just charge the cost of production the same as we would to the defense in making a request. But I'll tell you, the last two requests I've had, one was for the Diane Downs file. You might recall Diane Downs was convicted of killing one of her children and assaulting two of her others. And that file has had things added to it over the last 35 years. The preparation of the estimate took hours, and it's not even included in the estimate. The estimate that was prepared was for $2,125.60. We charge $40 an hour for staff time, because back when we set that fee, that was the loaded cost of an office assistant to copy the records. So we're not charging actual cost for attorney time. We're not charging actual cost if it's a paralegal or a legal secretary. We're not even actually charging what an office assistant costs anymore. But and then we charge the production fee. So that case, it was listed as 12 hours of staff time to prepare it. That is a complete underestimate, because it would be a lawyer reviewing it completely, as well as a staff person going through and doing the redactions. So, and then it has 2,000 pages estimated of police reports in boxes. There were videos, audios, and cassette tapes, 60 cassette tapes. We don't have the machinery actually to copy those cassettes. We can listen to them, and a staff person went through all 60, again, not included in the estimate, the time it took her to go through and listen to make sure that the tapes were still of a quality that could be copied. And then after all of that preparation, the requester, which was somebody from the University of Wisconsin, I don't know if it was for media or for a student report or what, said, I can't afford it. Can you get me the cassette tapes? So there's the 60 cassette tapes that we will have to send out and have somebody else reproduce. So that estimate hasn't been provided. This just happened, that he changed his mind about the request. And so we will have to find somebody who can copy into an electronic format 60 cassettes and provide that to him. And we could actually recover those costs because they're easily identifiable, but the rest of it we aren't. I'm never going to recover the staff time that's gone into that already. The second request, which is actually the last request that I just received, was for 40 case files from 1988 to 2016 related to drug convictions from a law agency that's wanting to go back and review whether they can get those convictions set aside. So we have records from 1988 to 2016, but a lot of those are in paper form. And so somebody has to go get those files and review them and scan them in and redact them. It has to be reviewed by a lawyer and then put onto a thumb drive or sent electronically. The ones from 2011 to the present are all electronic. It's fast, it's easy, it's fairly inexpensive to provide. But the things that come before 2011, I just haven't had the staff to be able to go back in time much more than 4 or 5 years to scan the files into the system. I am constantly without a full staff, and so we aren't recovering actual costs on any of this. But well, in that request, I didn't have staff for it because I had the person working on the Diane Downs case and asked county counsel to cover that for us, that we were going to take the time to pull the files and send the electronic files to county counsel, where they have interns that are specifically trained in public records to do the redactions and fulfill the request. So fortunately, they had that capacity, because I just don't. I've had 4 lawyers resign this year. I'm in an office that's got 24 in the criminal division, and constant openings in clerical support staff. And so these requests are really a huge burden on my office. But I do very much value the right of the public to access the records we have. We used to regularly provide access to the media, the Register Guard in particular. They had a court reporter who would come in and review stuff here. But you know, the media isn't the same as it was then. They don't actually send people any longer. So I haven't had the same level of requests or interest to look at our files since then. That's how it works. Our fee schedule is on our website. As I said, it was $40 an hour to review. Generally, almost all of them end up being just free, because I can do it really quickly without sending staff in to do it on the direct request to us. And the appeals are a terrific burden. So I would love to answer your questions.
Wow, Patty, thank you so much. This is super helpful. And I'm sorry that you are so short-staffed. I don't know if it's the great resignation, the pandemic, the changing dynamics of many things, but it sounds like there's a lot of work you guys have going on there, and really appreciate you taking the time out of that to come talk to us.
Every DA's office in the state is hiring, and so now we're going around and trying to poach each other's people. And DOJ took 2 of my senior lawyers in the last year.
Uh-oh. Okay, we're not going to bash out the rivalries here, but it's a tough space. Steve, you had your hand up. You want to go ahead? But you are muted.
Sorry. The first question was, I was interested to hear more about the request for 40 case files, some more details on that. I think you mentioned it was an organization that's trying to reverse people's convictions, and
yes.
Okay, it was. And what would you estimate was the actual cost? And are you recouping it from them?
I just have had a series, while I've been here with you, a series of emails on that very matter. And at this point, it's the last email was, we'll have all of the files pulled by the end of next week. So I don't have the estimate yet.
And are you charging a fee to the firm?
Well, it will be through county council, and they will charge their actual costs for it.
So you will be able to recoup your staff time costs?
I won't be recouping my staff time. My staff time is limited to just pulling the files and getting them over to county council. It will be county council that will be recouping their costs.
Okay. Why wouldn't your time be included in the fee estimate?
I think that, let me go back to the beginning of time. Oh no, we are requesting 3¼ hours to physically pull the files from the warehouse. It includes drive time over there and back. And then some of them are housed in an archive in the basement of this building. And then 2½ hours Oh, that's county council time scanning the paper files, and that's not my office. My office is 3 and 4 hours for pulling the physical files and getting them to county council and then emailing the electronic files.
Okay, that is a complicated and costly request. However, you will recoup the costs in this case.
Yes.
Or the county and the DA's office. And is that typical that like that type of requester? I imagine there are a lot of law firms that are filing these requests that are costly and complex.
We haven't had a lot of these kind of requests. We might get singular requests for information. A lot of the information that we're getting now, I don't know if you've heard of Senate Bill 819, and that was we need to, somebody can petition our office to go back on an old case and determine whether or not a different sentence or a different disposition would be appropriate. So that doesn't involve any public. They're not requesting records from us in that case. It is it's a lot of time that goes into it from my office, but it has nothing to do with, they're not requesting records in that circumstance. This is probably going to end up being a series of 40 requests for some other disposition or expungement, or I'm not quite sure where they're going to go with the 1988 through, the last, maybe the end of the 90s on those, but it's likely that it's going to be looking for expungement or some other function. And again, those are functions that my office has to take on without any compensation, but it doesn't involve usually public records.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I have one last question. And this is actually regarding the appeals function. So Oregon statute you talked about the public interest test on fee waivers, and the statute currently says if a request is in the public interest, an agency may waive fees. And some people have raised the question, okay, well, if it is in the public interest, what? And they've determined that, why wouldn't you make it shall? Do you have any thoughts on how that would affect your job if the statute said shall? Would that disambiguate anything for you?
Well, we would still, I imagine, if the agency said we're not waiving fees, then have to make a determination of whether it was in the public interest to have the fees waived. And it's an extrajudicial function that we're engaging in when we're telling other people how to do their job. So frankly, I would rather have the statute say you can collect this much money under any circumstance, or you can't collect money under a certain circumstance, than to have to make a decision of whether this particular information is worthy of a fee waiver when some other might not be. I mean, there are some cases that is absolutely clear that it's in the public interest to have the information disseminated. There are other circumstances where, yes, it's public it's public record, but nobody else on the planet's going to care about it. So then I say you don't get a fee waiver. Or, well, yeah, there's this one group of, animal lovers that you've got 50 people in your group of animal lovers and they all want this information. Is that in the public interest, or is that a specialized interest? And do I say, well, because 50 people are interested in this information on animal welfare, that it needs to be released?
Thank you.
I really just want out of this business.
Well,
Todd?
Kentucky has this function centralized at their Department of Justice. So not to give you any ideas, but.
Well, the U of O used to belong to the Department of Justice, and I don't know how they managed to make that trick happen at the legislative level, that they got to wash their hands of that public agency.
Interesting. Todd?
You might have just answered my question by saying you want out of the business entirely, but I'm just curious, hearing from a big agency like DEQ, and we're going to hear from PPB, they have or will explain their wants in terms of reform to the law because, we're considering the current cost system and how to maybe wholesale revise it or make tweaks in a way that doesn't hopefully pass on more cost to requesters, but also doesn't burden the public bodies doing this. And so for an agency like yours, your size, the type of work you do you sort of have any kind of wish list or ideas that would make sense to you to reform this law that we should keep in mind when we're drafting any legislation, or I should say legislative concepts?
Well, first I would say I would like to be out of the appeal business, but if I'm not out of the appeal business, then I would like some more clarity. I mean, there are a lot of exemptions that are pretty vague. And I mean, not to bash the U of O, but they have been allowed to create administrative rules that fit exemptions in public records law that I don't think are appropriate. But because they have been allowed to make these administrative rules, they have records that they deem to be exempt from disclosure. And I think at some point a circuit court is going to have to weigh in on that.
Do any examples come to mind as you're here, Patty?
Well, yes, there happens to be one that comes to mind, and that's that faculty records are exempt from disclosure. And under administrative rule, pretty much anyone who works at the U of O is deemed to be faculty.
Interesting. Okay. I had a question. Let's see. Oh, Michael, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
I do have a question, but first, I think that DOJ's, so we used to review the decisions of the U of O, and I think that our approach to some of their rules, like you're describing, may have been part of what motivated them to try and get out from under us and burden you instead. Because, yeah. I think faculty is a statutory term, and I think we may have actually published an order or two saying that it has statutory limits that they can't just ignore in their rulemaking. But anyway, aside from that, I'm just going to ask you a version of the question I asked Leela, and I think actually the answer may be different for your office. I mean, our office has one chief communications director, and we have a communications staff in the AG office of one, and we never charge for our time. But I'm wondering what communications staff does the county fund for the district attorney's office, and is that a resource that you dedicate to public records requests when you get them, if you have that resource at all?
I do not have that resource. I am the communications staff, and occasionally my chief deputy is the communications staff. And that's why a lot of the requests, well, I mean, all the requests come to me, and then why I say, oh, I can do this really fast. I'm not going to charge for it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I forgot to answer your question on the communications front, which is that DEQ does have a dedicated communications team, but they only handle our media requests, which, as you saw, is about 1% of our requests. So the rest don't go through that team.
Thanks for jumping on that, Leela. Patty, I want to ask you with this cassette tape thing, which I just find fascinating. Does it present an opportunity, or have there been other, because Leela was describing how the DEQ, a very large agency, was working toward making things proactively, available online. I mean, I would hate to have you pass up the chance to, if you're digitizing the cassettes, to not have them in a more easily accessible format for the next time around. But do things come up frequently enough in your office that it makes any sense to look at proactively making available any kinds of records, or do you already do that? Or even like one-off records, like once you put an investment into, although hopefully you'll recoup it, with the cassettes, does it make sense to retain that in some way? Is that, how do you view that kind of proactive approach from a small, office where you sit?
So we're generally behind the curve all the time, and particularly with our staffing shortages. In this case, it's now 35 years old, and this is the first time, at least since we haven't been using cassettes to copy, that someone's made a request. And there have been a lot of books and movies written on this matter. So no, we didn't already have it digitized, but now we will have it. And if somebody makes a request in the future, it will be available more easily and less expensive. But no, I wouldn't have, there's just so much media. I wouldn't put it up on my very limited website, but we do put information out via press release and social media when there's something that seems to be of the public's interest.
Right. And yes. And that's so interesting that no one had ever requested those before. I'm a radio reporter, so so I think in those terms all the time. But if you had the money and space, would there be things that you would think, oh, we should routinely, obviously you're not, you don't have the records for septic tanks, but we should just routinely make available, like Salem, similar to the DEQ septic tank, Salem puts all their permits just in a searchable database. Property tax stuff is in a searchable database in many districts. Is there anything that crosses your office that if you had the space and money, you think would be a record that would just default to, yeah, let's just put it out there so we don't have to deal with the requests?
Well, the information that would be easily accessible to the public is already done by the Oregon Judicial Department. The cases that we file are all available there. It would just be the cases that we're not filing. And if we don't file a case, the record belongs to the agency that prepared it. So, I don't know that we would have anything that would be particularly valuable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Thank you very much. Let's see. Mark, you haven't asked any questions yet. Would you like to?
It's sort of a question with a statement. There are 36 county district attorneys in the state of Oregon. This is the statement part. And not all counties are as well funded as I might suggest that Lane County is. I think about, for example, a Curry County or a Douglas County that really are struggling mightily. I'd also, here's my, I guess, question. Ms. Perlow, I assume that much of your budget in the district attorney's office is contingent on the county commission providing that funding to your office. Is that a fair statement?
So number one, I have to say that our property tax rate is sort of in the bottom of the state. There are small counties that are much better funded than we are. Lane County collects 11 cents on the dollar in property tax, and it includes our jail levies. So and my office is almost exclusively general fund. So we are not particularly well funded, and that's why my office remains in a terrible, disgusting, filthy building, and my staff can't grow, but the number of people who work here can't grow. And I would say, we used to have some grants. We still have a little bit of grant money coming in for victim services and a DV investigator. But other than that, we are strictly a general fund office.
And you're dependent on the county commission to provide your budget. Is that a fair statement as well, Ms. Perlow?
That is correct.
So my point is, and I'm just trying to channel Tyler in my thinking here, folks, knowing that Tyler's not here. He's our county representative, Ms. Perlow. You know, not all counties are created equal in this property tax system. And I just want to make it very clear that despite the fact that Lane County has only 11 cents on the dollar, they have a lot of actual taxable property, whereas you have some other counties that are very much rural, have a very low rate, and obviously, as a result, just do not have the funds to barely even keep a DA staff, let alone law enforcement on the streets and highways of those individual counties. So the money challenge here, I think, is bigger than the public records challenge. I just want to sort of point that out, that it's more of a systemic problem rather than you know, these budgets being busted due to the fact that public records are bearing various folks. But Ms. Perlow, I do have some sympathy for your cause on having to be the arbiter of all the appeals. I certainly understand and recognize that challenge. If you have a better idea of who should be doing that, I think we have a couple of ideas on that, Todd. But you know, that's probably for another day. I really appreciate your appearing before us today. I found your comments very interesting, although not terribly surprising. Thank you.
Well, if I can be of assistance to you any further, you all know how to find me, and certainly Todd knows how to find me.
Great. Well, we certainly appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to the Portland Police Bureau. Tammy Weiss, the Digital and Public Records Manager, is here. And I know we had delayed because of slides. Are things working? Is your track all working again, Jennifer?
They're going to work enough for us, I think. So can y'all see my screen?
Not now,
No.
Not yet. No.
All right. Well, let's try that again.
So I do want to say one thing before Jennifer starts, is that the city of Portland and the police bureau are using the GovQA system also, like DEQ is. So Jennifer so kindly pulled about 1 million reports for this, trying to get some good data for you. So we'll have her go through all the slides, but I'd be happy to answer any questions also.
Right.
Oh, super. Thank you.
And one thing to note is the city, including PPB, is in a year-long project where we're changing how we're invoicing and the data fields we're tracking and what questions we're going to be asking for fee waivers and rewriting our fee waiver policy. So that was an interesting challenge. We are trying to give you data from 2021, but in the middle of that year, some of our data fields changed. So that did make me a little crazy this week, but we'll do the best we can to give you information. So the city of Portland received over 33,629 public records requests in 2021. We do not track all of the resources that we commit to responding to records requests. What I did try and track, and is that my microphone making that feedback, or is that somebody else's?
If you're not Jennifer, could you please mute?
So every bureau, and there's over 30 of them, has at least one primary responder, as does each elected commissioner and the auditor. Some bureaus have more than one sort of primary responder that deal with specialized records. You know, we have somebody responding to underground storage tanks and fire EMT records. And so we did a rough calculation where we had these primary responders calculate the percent of time that they spend responding to public records requests and their wages. And if we had their overhead cost, we added those as part of their wages, so if they were available. We did not include the cost of additional employees because in addition to these, I think around 45 primary responders, we have well over 100 to 150 additional employees that could be locating records, searching for records, providing records, serving as subject matter experts to make sure we're getting the records at any given time. We also did include the cost of electronic tools. We have a text archiving tool, a public records electronic review tool. We have, of course, the GovQA, the request tracking system, and other electronic investments that the city has made to improve our public records response time. And of course, none of those tools, the city does not pass on any of those charges to the requesters. So our counting should be considered a significant underreporting in the cost that we invest in public records, because we know it doesn't include true overhead. We know it doesn't include all the tools, and we know it doesn't include all the employees. But just counting our primary responder staff time, we spend well over 2.8 million in just staff time responding to public records. Our fees are not designed to recover our actual cost. We have time that we are not going to attempt to recover, communicating with requesters, clarifying requests, trying to get them to narrow requests, giving them estimates. As the DA was discussing, the time to create a cost estimate is sometimes very time consuming. It's when we spend a lot of the time locating our records, determining who has records, and we never attempt to track that time or recover for that time. We also don't charge for time to collect email and text collection. Our city council hired an employee to do this who works in the city attorney's office so that we could do it cheaper and faster. And so we waive that time on those collections. Our charges are focused on the time we spend actually collecting, reviewing, and redacting records. So that's what our charges are designed to recover. And our fee schedule sets time at an employee's hourly rate plus 39%. The 39% is not designed to be true overhead, but it's a discounted overhead set by City Council to defray some of those costs. As I said before, 33,629 requests, a new high for us in 2021. Every year we break our last year's record. 25,000 of those were made to the Police Bureau. Of those Police Bureau requests, 15,712 were from what is sometimes referred to as commercial reporting companies like LexisNexis. Now, some people discount the importance of the commercial reporting companies. I do want to remind people that those requests are often made on behalf of insurance companies so that real people who have had real injuries can recover for stolen cars, for burglaries. So PPB does see those as important to be filled. It's not like LexisNexis is just asking for random police reports to put on LexisNexis for reporting. They're doing it on behalf of insurance companies so insured people can be reimbursed. So those commercial reporting companies were charged $286,728 for requests completed in 2021. All other requests citywide had charges of $214,328, which averaged to be about a little less than $12 per request.
I'm sorry, Jennifer.
Yes.
Jennifer Mark-Landauer, could we back up one just so I can?
I am not sure I can back up, Mark. I will try it.
Okay.
I'm working on my laptop because of the
Understood.
crazy computer.
There we go.
I went forward again. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Um,
So I can try to remember this.
okay.
So the city charged approximately $280,000 for non-LexisNexis relate. There we go. The city collected $214,000 from non-commercial requesters.
Yes.
And if I see correctly, you did collect almost $290,000 from the commercial requesters as well.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I just needed to. I'm not being picky. I just don't think your slide is adequately represents here on the left-hand side in the gray box what the city actually collected. It would be more on the order of almost $500,000, but you say from non-commercial. Okay, I've got it all straight in my head. You can go forward. Sorry, I just needed to get it all straight.
That amount is just from non-commercial requesters.
Right, I
would like to have
a
slide like DEQ where we're pulling it out from all the different types of requesters. But because of the way we changed our tracking, to do that might have killed me. But next year,
No,
I think we'll have much better.
I appreciate it. I just was trying to get all the numbers straight. I've got them squared away in my head, and it's nice to see you again, by the way.
It's good to see you, and I have lots of numbers. Tammy and I spent a lot of time talking about numbers, so I'm happy to delve deep here.
For Jennifer to put that number up there, the reason why it's split out is the number, the cost that we invoiced out to the commercial companies is not indicated in GovQA. We do that because they're like 40% of our requests. So to make things faster, they make one lump payment. So instead of having my staff have to go into each and every request and show that they made a payment, Jennifer has made it so they don't get that invoice. They get a billing every month that shows how much they owe, and that speeds up their process a little bit, and ours.
Yeah, spend less time on each request. We have had a process improvement coach, and when you have 25,000 requests, if you can even save a minute per request, it makes a significant difference. So we have looked at our minutes to try and shave off time wherever possible. Okay.
Can I ask a question about that slide too, actually, before we move on? You don't have to go back.
Make her go back.
No.
It's okay. I finally figured out how. So sure, ask anything.
Don't worry about going back. I'm just a little bit confused and wanting to make sure I understand what you're getting at. I think what you're suggesting is that a lot of those on behalf of insurance companies and other people are like people whose car was stolen are wanting a copy of the police report showing their car was stolen type of thing. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
How hard would it be for the city or for the police to just provide people whose cars are stolen with a copy of the police report saying their cars are stolen without making them go through a public records request?
That is something the police bureau is examining. If people make a report through CopLogic, where they self-report without involving an officer, they automatically can have a copy of their own police report without making a public records request. But if they make a report that involves an officer, and Tammy might have to explain this better, but if their police report involves an officer, the officer has to file the report. The report has to be reviewed by somebody in records, and then we have to release it, and we have to review it for CJIS and LEDS information, which can't be released, or we lose our CJIS and LEDS certification.
So there's actually two parts to that. When you file a police report with a police officer, they will write a report, and honestly, we're shorthanded on police officers also. They write the report, it has to be reviewed by a sergeant. It gets approved by the sergeant. It goes to our records division, and they check for any IBER errors, which we are audited on that sort of thing. And they have to make sure that it is coded properly. Nobody wants to get a copy of a police report where the officer accidentally made them a suspect instead of the victim. So it's records responsibility to verify all that information. That has to be done before we will release it. If a victim needs a copy of their report, they can make the request. We have a separate area in GovQA. If they mark that they are a crime victim, we try to get those done faster. We are actually ahead of where records is. They are about half staff. We only have about 25 employees when we're staffed for around 57. So, so sometimes our public records people have to coordinate with them to get their process done before we can even release it. So it's a little more time consuming than just being able to give them the report that the officer writes.
Okay, but I assume you're not charging them for making sure the officer coded them correctly. That's just a matter of it needs to be done before they can get the report.
Yes, that's a part of the records section. We've tried to split that up a little bit. It used to be where we didn't have any public records people at all until about 5 years ago. I finally convinced them to get a unit together. What did I start with, Jennifer? 3 people in my group, and now I'm up to 8. So, so I don't have to have those people work on the other part of the reports. They can concentrate on public records.
Okay,
Does that
Anything-
answer your question?
yeah, it does.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
So-
Steve also has his hand up. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Jennifer. Didn't mean to
sorry.
interrupt
No,
you.
no, I can't see your hands up because I'm working on this really teeny laptop. So I'm
Okay, great.
happy that
So-
you interrupt me. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Jennifer, I had a question about the $2.8 million in costs.
Okay.
I guess those are direct costs. So did you say that was from GovQA, or was there some separate estimate provided?
No. So what we did is I made a list of the primary responders, the people assigned to each bureau. And then I followed up with them and asked them to estimate how much time each week they spend on public records. And it ranged from somebody with a very, very small bureau said, I only spend 8 hours a year, to the 3 people who work in the city attorney's office who spend 100% of their time. And so we took those, I'm sorry, what?
Oh, so that would be like the 8 people that Tammy was talking about who spend 100% of their time in the police bureau.
That is correct. That is correct. And so we took those percentages and their salaries plus overhead if available. So some bureaus know what their staff overhead is, some bureaus don't. And we added that up. And the reason I said that that is a significant underreporting is because every bureau I work with does not rely just on its primary responder for requests, right? So when you send a request to the Bureau of Transportation for its e-scooter program, the primary responder there, Dimitri, gets in touch with the 2 or 3 people who work on e-scooters, and she asks them, you know, do you have these type of records? Can we run a report that will give us these type of records? How long would it take us to get these type of records? You know, here's the request. You know, are you the right people? And so that's how that dialogue begins until we find the person who can get those records, and we figure out how long it's going to take. We figure out if we're going to charge, and we get those records. And so that estimate of 2.8 million did not include the time for that PBOT e-scooter employee. It does not include the time for a city attorney to review privilege records from the Revenue Bureau. Which, you know, there's a city attorney reviewing privilege records from every bureau all the time. I have 3 reviews in my queue right now that needed to be done yesterday. So guess what I'll be doing Friday night, because I like to live wild. So, you know, that time is not included, except for me, because I'm 100% records all the time. So my time's included.
Okay, and follow up to that. Actually, this is sort of a subset of all costs. Does GovQA contain, or does the city record at all cost estimates that are generated regardless of whether or not a fee was collected?
Sort of. Okay. So, for a number of bureaus, if we can complete your request in an hour or less, we don't give you a fee estimate. We do your request and give you the records. It was 30 minutes, and we've increased it to an hour. That is not for all bureaus. The ones that have preset fees, that hour waiver doesn't apply. So in those cases, there will be no estimate, and GovQA will not record an estimate. For other if it's going to be more than an hour and we give you the fee waiver, we give you the fee estimate, that is in GovQA. But when we go back and we do our final charges, so we give you a fee estimate, we ask for a deposit of 50%, then we do our work, then we have to true up, right? So let's say I estimated it was going to be $200. And I did my work and it was $300. Then I would go in and change that and say, oh, it was more, it was $300. Or let's say it was $200 and it was only $150. I go in and I change that to your final charges are only $150. And if you had paid more, then I need to do whatever refund was due you at that time. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yes, I do have a follow-up though.
Okay.
So you would have a record of requests for which an estimate was generated, but the requester decided to withdraw because they chose not to pay the fee or whatever. Is that correct? And like, would you be able to pull that total out of the system? Like what was the total dollar amount estimated that people walked away from?
I am not sure. I can run a report just on that. Okay. So let's say that my initial estimate was $1,000. I had one like that. I said, right now, I'm estimating, we're going to have 2,000 emails. Can we talk about narrowing your request? And so we talked about what they were looking for. We changed the terms. We gave them another estimate. And so they paid that estimate. I don't know that I could, there would be an email that said your estimate is in the invoicing system, but once I edited that invoicing system and had the new estimate, I don't know that I could go back and generate that old estimate. And I don't know that I could run a report that just showed estimates we made where they did not pay for them, because we don't have a closing status for that. We don't have a closing status.
If the requester says, all right, I'm not interested anymore, wouldn't you mark that in GovQA as closed requester?
I have withdrawn by requester, and I have administratively closed because they didn't act on it after 60 days. But administratively closed can include We asked for clarification. We asked a question. They just ignored us for 60 days, or it could include, they didn't pay for 60 days. Sometimes those non-payments are, we ask for the permit fee of $15, which can include anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, and they just didn't pay it. I mean, that's not an estimate. So no, I don't think I could drill down at the level you're talking about without manually reviewing a lot of requests.
Yeah,
I mean, I could think about it, but right now,
Yeah.
what you're asking, I don't believe we have a status that correlates, and those invoices get voided, and sometimes they get changed.
Yeah. Well, let me just offer one last thought, and then I'll drop it. But if you just look at the requests that were withdrawn by requester or administratively closed, it would be interesting to see the cost estimates associated with those. If there are people, in fact, who are not pursuing, well, we don't know, but it would be useful information if it were feasible. I recognize it may not be feasible. Thank you.
We have a policy that if it's a high invoice, we provide them the option to get a sample set, to do a deposit, and get a smaller set to work with us to narrow. So we try and provide them a number of options to look at the request in an attempt to narrow, to see if we can get them some of the information and lower the cost. So every time there's a high estimate, there's a number of alternatives that are offered to them to try and get that lowered. And the other thing is that, given that City Council has hired somebody to do email searches now, we radically changed how we're handling email searches. Before, we had to sort of guess how many emails we would have. And now we have them do what we call a test search, which is not 100% because they didn't actually pull the records, and it doesn't always count the attachments, but it sort of counts the number of emails so we can tell the requester. And, in certain situations where we feel like the number of emails is not what we think we should see for the topic, we talk to the requester and we try and suggest changes. So I had one, and I think, Todd, I mentioned this one at the last time I spoke here, where one of the terms was relay. And I can't remember the other terms, but I was kind of surprised at the volume of email. And so I asked the employee doing the test search, and we discovered that relay was turning up in the signature block for all city employees, because we provide relay services for people who need an alternative if they have a hearing issue. And so I talked to the requester and I sent them, the quote where relay was turning up. And I said, I don't think this is what you want. Can we think of alternative terms? And they're like, no, that is not what I'm looking for. And we thought of alternative terms. And again, we were able to significantly lower the cost and focus down on what they wanted. And we weren't really able to do that until council funded this person that was able to help us focus on those email searches. And so we're really trying to search smarter to the extent possible and work more with requesters. Some are not interested, and of course that's their choice, but we've had success, I think, with a lot of requesters in working with them on their searches.
Great. Thank you, Steve and Jennifer. Todd, I know you have your hand up. I have a quick question I think might slide in here, I hope. Just to clarify, I appreciate how you explained how you came up with the estimate of costs. So is it correct to assume you don't regularly track costs for that are associated with providing responses to public records, that you came up with this for this testimony, which I really appreciate.
That is all correct.
Okay, so
that is all correct.
So it's not something that you regularly keep an eye on?
We do not.
Okay, Thank you. Todd, go ahead, please.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I had to do it at least once. I was going to say we might be blessed with too many great speakers here today. I want to make sure that our last speaker has time to present. And I wonder, Emily, if you'd be open to it, if our guests would be open to possibly receiving limited on-point written questions that they could respond to, just to make sure, because I'm up against a little bit of a deadline when it comes to childcare past 3 o'clock. And I don't know what anyone else's schedule is like today, but I want to make sure everyone can be heard in enough time.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And you're right, we have had an abundance of really quality people in front of this committee and really appreciate that. And we do still have Vance Crony from Benton County, who we definitely want to hear from. And childcare or not, we don't want to go over. Does anybody have, you have some more slides to go through, Jennifer,
I
which
do.
we
Why
want
don't
to
I
see.
try and pick up the pace and then let's see if we have questions, okay? Would
Thank
that work
you
for
very much.
everybody?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so oops, I didn't mean to pick it up that quickly. So I think that prior slide that y'all saw indicated that we have 3 types of fee waivers. I think we've talked about the crime victim fee waiver quite a bit. We also give economic fee waivers. Some people need public records requests for certain things and they indicate it's an economic hardship. And so we give them a fee waiver. And then, of course, there's the one people are familiar with, public interest fee waivers. We ask questions similar to what DEQ indicated. I don't necessarily find those questions helpful, and we don't necessarily get what I would call complete answers. And so we're working on trying to reframe those questions that will get the information that the city needs to consider for those public interest fee waivers. PPB granted over 2,500 fee waivers to crime victims in 2021. Those were for police reports, so that's about $75,000 in fee waivers to crime victims. The city, and again, we were asked for 2,300 in fee waivers. We sometimes grant fee waivers to people who didn't ask for it with our 1-hour fee waivers. As I mentioned, they were 30-minute fee waivers, but we increased that in July of 2021. We also track dollar amounts of fee waivers that are over 1 hour. We granted over $65,960 in fee waivers beyond those 1-hour fee waivers. And those were generally public interest fee waivers. It is our council's goal to proactively disclose information. So we have one of the first open data policies to support that. We have a lot of information that is already posted, all budget informations. Most bureaus have a dashboard. PPB's dashboard gets a lot of interest because it's about different crime statistics. We also try and provide information through alternate means, Twitter, Facebook. Portland Maps is a project to digitize all permit records. It's, as mentioned by prior speakers, it's very expensive. So there's an ongoing records conversion project. So going forward, permit records are digitized, and slowly but steadily historic records are being digitized so that eventually all of the Portland Maps records would be online and available. And then bureaus issue press releases to provide, other information to the public in different means. This is just a sample of the different dashboards we have. Our advisory groups post, agendas, minutes, major information online. We have a robust e-file system, so all of our city council filings, everything that goes before council, whether it be contracts, settlements, anything before council can be found in e-files. And then different bureaus are working proactively to post additional records on e-files. So this year, RISC is rolling out a system going forward that they will post all tort claims notices because that's something that the media often is requesting. And so hopefully over time, since they began posting those in January of 2022, eventually, going forward, all of those will be posted too. We have a trending topics link connected with our records request system so that if we get several people requesting the same information, we can just proactively post it. This is just a random sampling of stuff we've been posting on trending topics. So we found that people were asking every week for sidewalk repair notices. So PBOT, that's our Portland Bureau of Transportation, just started putting those up. When requesters asked for the mayor's text messages, we started posting those because we would get another request for them shortly. Information related to the DOJ settlement, whenever there was a request for anything related to the 2020 protest, that was also proactively posted. And then, bureaus also are posting major reports. I just had Fire Bureau, put out a sample, related to summer fires, but, things like annual performance reports, strategic plans, all of those are being posted. In the issues that are increasing costs, I feel like most of them have been discussed by your prior speakers. This is what happens when I try and go too fast. Unstructured data is where it's expensive, right? And doing email communications and reviewing email communications. Because you're going through email and you're thinking, oh, this can all go out. And it's funny that the DEQ speaker spoke about checks, but yes, I was going through a bunch of applications. I'm like, oh, this is all good, because I was reviewing hot topics that the Bureau wanted a second review, and there was a check with all their routing information that, no, we did not want to make publicly available since, they could empty out their bank account. And so, that's what you get. You get 5,000 emails, boring, tedious, and then one email that if you release would cause somebody real harm. And not necessarily, City of Portland records that real harm, but that of the public. And, our employees feel that public trust very strongly and want to be careful with the information the public gives us. Broad email searches often return records that is not really what the requester wants, but because they're part of the agreed search terms, we end up reviewing them. If we don't provide these non-relevant emails that were part of that search, and we end up in court because they think they haven't gotten all the records, we can have to pay attorney fees because we did not provide what I sometimes think of in my head as redundant trash, because I know that the 5th copy of the budget report is not what they were looking for when they made the email search. But we are going to provide the 5th copy of the budget report because we do not want to risk any attorney fees. And requesters become frustrated by receiving the irrelevant records, but the city can't take the risk of paying attorney fees because something we thought, wasn't important, maybe was what they wanted. And so I wish there was some kind of safe harbor where we would not risk attorney fees and we could work better on some of these irrelevant records and not provide them. Some times when we are able to do like these sample searches, I've had some requesters go through and we've been able to agree, in this search terms, we will exclude ones that meet the following search terms. But that requires a level of search sophistication that I'm not sure all requesters have, and it also requires a level of trust. And I don't want any requester to feel like I'm tricking them out of something they want. I want them to have whatever it is they want, but I want them to have it as cheaply and as quickly as we can get it. And getting 100 emails about some irrelevant topic is not helpful to them. And so we're still working on ways to avoid that sort of, background noise while getting to what they need. The other problem is as we enhance our search tools so that we can search for more, some requesters are like, yes, I would like a citywide search of the word dirt. And we're like, well, the 5 employees who worked on these projects are these 5 people. Are you sure you don't want to search for them? And no, they do want to search for everybody because they can. And that will run up the charges, but you know, they are allowed to make that request. Sometimes it's not physically impractical to give all the records. You know, PPB had a search last year that would take an employee 40 hours a week in 6 months, and they did not have an extra employee to do that work. And because PPB employees have to be backgrounded, we could not figure out how we were going to onboard an extra staff to work for 6 months, 40 hours a week to try and fill the request. Now, the requester changed their mind and narrowed it and took something different. But, you know, when you have a really large request, there's no one with bandwidth to do that, particularly if it's like for PPB where they have to be backgrounded and CJIS certified and lead certified to review records.
Jennifer, I don't want to cut you off because you have so much useful information and this is really helpful. We do have just a short period left, so I wonder if you'd be open to taking questions from the committee if we were able to send them to you.
Sure. Or if you want me to come back in 3 weeks or whatever, we can, after you look at the last 2 slides, I'm happy to do that too. I do work on public records full time, so I'm happy to think deeply about this with you because I would love to find a system that works better for all of us so that we could get the records that people need and want as cheaply and efficiently as possible. I think that's what my city council wants. That's what they've directed us to do. And I would love to work with this committee to find better ways to do that.
Thank you. That's a very generous offer. I really appreciate that. I'm sure the rest of the committee does as well. And I think Todd has already asked if you could share the slide deck as to post along
I'll
with
send
everything
it,
else.
of course.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thanks to Tammy as well. Mr. Croney, I apologize for keeping you waiting, but if you are still here, we would love to hear your experience as Benton County Council. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks. I know, Todd, you've got 7 minutes. I've been in your shoes many years ago, so I will respect your 3 o'clock daycare timeline.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm good to at least 3:15 though. I just didn't want to go too far past that.
I understand. So I'm not going to go over a lot of ground that everybody else has covered. I just want to, I guess, kind of set the stage by emphasizing that as the last batter here in this inning, I am far and away the smallest county, the smallest organization you will have heard from. DEQ, Lane County, the city of Portland. You know, I'm listening to Leela talk about 50 public records specialists or coordinators, and I'm going, holy cow, 50. I think that's more than we have in our entire law enforcement department. So just let me just give you just a very brief overview of how public records are handled in Benton County. So I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Vance Croney. I'm the entire public records department for Benton County, but I'm also the county attorney. So when we get a public record request, it comes into the department or through our webmaster, and then it's funneled through to the correct person in the department. If it's something more than a routine request, hey, can I get copies of the septic records for the property I'm looking at? Can I get copies of the ALSI Human Services County Service District board meeting from January? Anything more than routine, the request will come to me and I'll take a look at it. My first job is to determine whether the records are exempt from disclosure. If the answer is no, then I kick it back to the department and say, will you please pull together let me know how much time it's going to take to gather these records if it's more than a few, and then send it to me. If it's, you know, a handful of documents, it's only going to take them, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. We don't worry about providing an estimate to the requester. The department will send me the records and I'll go through them to make sure that we're not going to be disclosing confidential or exempt information. Usually that requires redacting socials, email addresses, telephone numbers. On police reports, I know that Mr. Crone asked a question about police reports of Portland. Sometimes we do have to redact victim phone numbers, victim date of birth, that sort of thing. But we turn those things around very quickly. Once I've gone through my review of the records, then depending on the type of records, I'll kick it back to the department, and then they will send it out to the requester. It's probably inefficient, but our system is so much smaller. We have so much fewer resources and personnel that we can't centralize it. In fact, it's probably not practical to centralize it in some place as small as Benton County. So just to give you an idea, between 2018 through the end of 2021, I responded to and handled 94 requests. There were more than 200 other requests that didn't come to me because they were the routine basic requests. So we're talking about 300 requests for our organization over 4 years. And about a third of those came my way. And just to give you a little bit more information, because I just saw some astronomical numbers for costs and estimates. Of the 94 requests that we got, 12 of them involved providing a cost estimate to the requester. And of those 12, 4 paid the cost to have us produce those records. Let me tell you what the costs they paid were. $15, $12, $26, and $275. So it's not like we are giving them a bill for $975. We're not charging them, $600 to go through and pull out board meeting minutes for the last year. We just don't get those kind of requests. If we do get those kind of requests, because we are small enough, we reach out directly. I reach out directly to the requester. Candidly, it's not unusual for me to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, look, you're asking for something that's going to force us to go into the paper records. We're happy to do that. But is there something you're really looking for rather than asking staff and end up costing you money that we can look for to narrow the search and get you what you want? It's almost always successful. And I can't tell you how important it is in a small community for our staff, for me, for our board of commissioners to establish that kind of relationship with the public so that there is that mutual trust. And I know that the woman from Portland was talking about making sure that there's trust on both ends. I feel like over the years, we have established that trust such that when we do reach out to the requesters, they understand we're not trying to hide something from them. We're trying to help them get what they want in a timely manner and at either no cost or very little cost compared to what, if we had taken at face value, their request might have resulted in. So we find that approach to be very helpful. It's probably, I suppose, provincial, but it works. With that, I want to just kind of contrast some of the information that has come from the larger jurisdictions. So, and I guess this isn't a contrast, but this is a reaffirmation. The costs Benton County that we will estimate to a requester almost always result from the need to research those doggone paper files. And I can't overstate how important it is to digitize our records. We're small, we don't have the resources, we don't have the money to engage in a large one-time project that would digitize our records. So each department is charged with digitizing its records on its own as it has time and as it has the funding that's been made available in any given budget cycle, which means that some departments, Board of Commissioners office here, is further ahead than, say, the assessment department. It's just the way it is. But the digital aspect of record searches is so much easier for the public. We make it available to them. If it's not available to the public, it's so much easier for our staff to search and locate. And here's the big deal. Transmit those records. We can send it via email. We can put it in a Dropbox and they can go get it. It's just so much more convenient, but we don't have the time or the resources or the personnel to make that shift 100%. We're in the process, but it's kind of like turning an ocean liner. Once you turn the wheel, it takes a little while for that ship to change course, but we're on our way. When we talk about the fees we charge, we charge actual fully loaded costs because we don't have staff dedicated to public records. So if we have a series of public record requests dealing with old land use files and we have to pull one or two of our planners off of their ordinary jobs, that means other applications aren't getting done. So it's a trade-off. So when we have to estimate costs, it's the fully loaded benefit. I don't charge my time. That would in Benton County, I believe that would make the costs prohibitive, and I think that would begin to sow seeds of discontent among the public if they started seeing the attorney's time charged in there to go through these documents. So we don't. Appeals to the DA. I don't know that this was touched on, but in Benton County, I have an excellent relationship with our district attorney. I would say in the last 12 years, there's been maybe 3 appeals of a public record request to the district attorney. I think one of those was because documents were exempt, and I think the other 2 were costs. I think I flipped that around. 2 were exempt requests and 1 was cost. But what helped in that appeal is that I knew that was the direction that the request was going. I could tell from the back and forth emails with the requester. So I had preliminary conversations with the district attorney. He and I had looked at the documents. We'd looked at what was going to happen. And my communication back to the requester was based on a fully informed discussion with the district attorney. So by the time the appeal got to the DA, he had seen everything. He and I were in agreement on how to proceed. So the appeal didn't result in a different decision. And I don't want that to come across as me saying we colluded to get an outcome. Really what it was about was making sure that my response to the requester, my read of the statutes as what constituted exempt documents, jived with his reading. And again, I don't think I'm the only attorney here, so there's not a whole lot of other people to bounce these ideas off. So I do need to be cognizant of my opportunities, and then DA does present it on occasion. Last but not least, I think I want to touch on, I think somebody asked about whether if the legislature was to change the fee waiver from we may waive if there's a public interest to you shall waive if there's a public interest. I believe that would be a terrible thing for small jurisdictions. And I'm not talking just about Benton County, but I'm talking about small cities. I'm talking about special districts. Remember, these special districts are also subject to public records law, and they often have just regular citizens volunteering to be board members, and they have no savvy, no understanding about public records law. And without the ability to at least push back a little bit, I think these small jurisdictions can get swamped with some of these changes that come through the public records law. For me, we have had in the last 4 months, 2 extremely hotly contested matters come up, which have resulted in a disturbing trend. And that has been a sort of weaponization, if you will, of public record requests. A group of neighbors, a group of advocates for a certain position will essentially just begin to flood our staff with requests. we'll respond back to them saying, essentially, it's going to cost you this much money and this much time. And then they'll come back with the responses, oh, that's not what I meant. I meant something else. So these latest rounds of public record requests aren't designed as much to get documents as they are to harass staff. And I don't know if that's just something that's unique to Benton County in the last, 4 or 5 months, or if that's a growing trend. We saw a lot of it following the 2020 election. We saw just a slew of public record requests aimed at our elections, our ballot counting, etc. Every county in the state had those kinds of requests. Fortunately, we were able to push all of those requests up to the state, to the Secretary of State's office, but I believe it opened the eyes to some folks to the ability to sort of make life difficult at the grassroots level. And it's unfortunate because, our folks just, they want to help people. They want to give them information that's available at the cheapest, usually freest, is that a word? Freest? Most free cost, and as quickly as possible. So to have them overworked, I think, does not do a service to anybody. Happy to answer questions. Todd, I think I got through well within the 3:15 barrier.
Thank you very much, Vance Kearney. Really appreciate it. I definitely want to, in the few minutes we have left, and thanks everybody. I know we have said we're going to end on time. Now we're going over a little bit, but thanks for clarification, Todd, on your time to ask questions. But I do also, we have promised a public comment period, so I do want to be able to have at least a couple minutes to offer to the public to comment today. So any members of the subcommittee, first of all, have questions for Vance Kearney?
I just like to ask. I know that that Jennifer had volunteered to answer written questions, but like if we wanted to hit up any of our panelists, do all of you agree to doing that? Especially Vance, since you got so little time.
As long as they're short questions.
We'll ask for a fee waiver.
Okay.
and maybe for process,
Thank
they
you.
can all go through Emily or me too, Emily.
Yeah, we could maybe gather anybody's questions, and we can put a deadline out on that for folks, just to smooth things. Good idea, Todd. Does anybody want to take a minute with Vance right now?
Why don't we just go straight to the public?
Todd, you're probably going to say the same thing. Good. Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's important to hear rural and small county perspectives like Vance's. So I'm really happy he agreed to participate. We're trying for one size fits all legislation, so it's going to have to be, I think, pretty dynamic to work. So we need these perspectives.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. Yeah, really appreciate that. And everybody today. Is there anyone who is here at the meeting, a member of the public, not on the committee, who would like to comment or ask a question? If you do so, please make yourself known. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone again and ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
That's in stereo. Okay. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor of adjourning for today? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay. We'll see you all again in 3 weeks. And I believe that's the one where LPRO is going to report back to us, if I've got the schedule in my mind right. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.